Welcome. You've found yourself here, perhaps at the end of a long day, looking for a gentle escape into the past. Tonight, we'll drift together across the open waters of the 19th century, aboard one of the great whaling ships of the age. But unlike the stories that often emphasize adventure, peril, or drama, our journey will be unhurried, steady, and quiet in exploration, not of battles with whales, but of the slow rhythm of life at sea. Imagine yourself on deck as the last light of day fades. The wooden boards beneath your feet are worn smooth from years of use. A faint saltiness hangs in the air, mingling with the lingering scent of tar and rope. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, its surface rippling with the calm movements of the wind. There is no urgency here, no sudden surprises, only the steady breath of the waves, the creak of the ship's timbers, and the lives of men who call this floating world their home. Over the course of this gentle voyage, we'll explore 4 facets of life aboard such a ship. First, we'll immerse ourselves in the daily routines of the crew, their meals, their work, and the small comforts they clung to in the midst of long months at sea. Then, we'll turn to a particular life story, stepping quietly into the biography of a whaling captain, whose measured choices reveal the steady determination needed to endure these journeys. Afterward, we'll explore the mysteries of whaling culture, from the folk beliefs sailors carried with them to the archaeological remnants that tell us more than words ever could. Finally, we'll draw our gaze upward to the contrasting lives of those who profited most from whaling, the merchants and elites on shore, and how their experience differed so completely from those who lived day by day upon the ocean. So, let your thoughts drift, settle into stillness, as if lying in a hammock on a gently swaying deck. The noises of your own world may begin to fade into the background, replaced by the timeless rhythm of the sea. And with that, let us step softly into the first segment, the daily life of a 19th century whaling crew. Picture yourself waking in the cramped darkness of the forecastle, the sleeping quarters reserved for the common sailors. The space is low-ceilinged, barely high enough to sit upright. Hammocks swing gently, creaking with the movement of the waves, while dim lantern light casts long shadows across the beams overhead. The air is close, thick with a mingling sense of salt, dampened wood, worn clothing, and the faint, lingering aroma of salted meat from the meal the night before. For the men who sailed on these voyages, the day began not with a rush of alarm bells or the bustle of modern life, but with a slow, steady awakening to the rhythm of the ship. A boatswain's voice might rouse them, calm but insistent, calling hands to the day's labor. The roll of the ocean determined their pace. Sometimes the ship pitched sharply, tossing sleepers against one another, while, at other times, it glided so smoothly one might almost forget it was moving at all. Morning meals were simple, predictable, and far from luxurious. Salt pork, hardtack biscuits, perhaps a ladle of thin porridge if provisions allowed. The biscuits, baked hard to endure the months at sea, often carried with them the faint taste of staleness, softened only when dipped into warm liquid. Water, stored in great barrels, grew stale over time, sometimes tinged with a faint mustiness. And yet, to the men, This routine became familiar, comforting in its constancy. After breakfast, the day's work unfolded. There were decks to scrub, sails to mend, and ropes to coil. The soundscape of the ship was its own kind of music. The rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, the creak of rigging, and the muted calls exchanged from mast to deck. Tasks were not hurried, but continuous, repeated in an endless cycle that gave structure to lives otherwise unmoored from land. Imagine the feel of tar-stained rope beneath calloused hands. The way fibers roughened skin until it grew tough and unfeeling. Picture sailors moving together as they hoisted sails, their voices joining in a work chant low, steady, and measured. The song itself was not meant for entertainment so much as for synchronization, ensuring the men's efforts aligned as smoothly as the waves beneath them. Between moments of labor came long stretches of waiting. Whaling was not a constant pursuit. Often days passed with no sighting of a whale. During these intervals, sailors turned to quiet diversions. Some carved scrim-short delicate designs etched into whalebone or ivory, often depicting ships, landscapes, or scenes from memory. Others mended clothes, patched hammocks, or simply sat in stillness, gazing out across the water. Their thoughts drifting as endlessly as the horizon. Life aboard was marked by simplicity, but also by endurance. Clothing became stiff with salt, boots wore thin, and hair grew long and tangled in the wind. The men endured the steady rocking of the ship, the repetition of meals, the same faces seen day after day. And yet, within that monotony lay a kind of rhythm, predictable, grounding, even meditative. As evening approached, meals were taken again, much the same as in the morning, though perhaps with the occasional variation a bit of fish caught over the side, or preserved beans if stores permitted. Afterward, men gathered in small groups, telling stories quietly in the fading light. Some recited verses remembered from home, others simply listened to the sea. Night settled slowly upon the ship. The lanterns were lit, their glow warm against the dark. Above, the stars spread across the sky in a brilliant canopy, far more vivid than in towns and cities on land. To lie back and gaze at them was to feel both the vastness of the ocean and the smallness of one's own place within it. The day aboard a whaling ship did not end sharply. Instead, it slipped into rest as gently as the tide. One by one, sailors returned to their hammocks, swaying softly in rhythm with the vessel. The ship itself seemed to breathe with them, the groan of its timbers like a slow exhalation, the hush of the waves like a lullaby. And so, daily life unfolded, repetitive, yes, but deeply patterned, forming a world of its own upon the wide and endless sea. To better understand life aboard a whaling vessel, let us follow the quiet path of one particular man, Captain George Pollard, Jr., a name remembered not for triumph, but for the enduring patience and humility he carried with him. Pollard was born in Nantucket, a small island community that pulsed with the rhythms of the sea. Nantucket in the 19th century was a place where nearly every boy grew up with the scent of salt in the air and the sight of masts on the horizon. From an early age, George, like so many others, absorbed the knowledge of tides, winds, and the delicate craft of seafaring. His youth was not marked by dramatic tales of ambition, but by steady apprenticeship, learning to tie knots, to read the sky, to sense the moods of weather and water. By the time he rose to command, he was already a seasoned man of the sea. His face lined by sun and wind, his manner calm and deliberate. Unlike the more fiery captains of his day, Pollard carried a demeanor that was soft-spoken, even hesitant. And yet, beneath that quiet exterior, there lay a determination shaped by years of patient endurance. It was Pollard who took command of the whaling ship Essex, a vessel that would become part of maritime legend. In the year 1820, the ship set sail from Nantucket, bound for the rich hunting grounds of the Pacific. The journey, like many, began without drama. Daily life unfolded as we have already described, men rising to their duties. Provisions carefully rationed, and the ocean stretching endlessly around them. But the Essex would face a fate that few could have foreseen. Far from home, in the deep Pacific, the ship encountered a sperm whale of extraordinary size and force, striking the vessel not once but twice. The whale inflicted damage so great that the ship was mortally wounded, timbers splintered, and the crew forced to abandon their floating home. It would be easy to linger on the terror of such a moment. But instead, let us notice the quiet resolve with which Pollard and his men took to the small whaleboats. Their great ship was gone, but the rhythm of survival now lay in the steady strokes of oars and the measured sharing of provisions. Day after day, they faced the vastness of the ocean, clinging not to hope of quick rescue, but to the discipline of order, dividing rations, repairing boats, navigating by the stars. The aftermath of the Essex is remembered for its hardships, for hunger and desperate choices. Yet, within this darkness, one can glimpse Pollard's steady presence. He was no heroic figure in the traditional sense, no bold leader rallying men with fiery speeches. Instead, he was a man who endured, who carried the burden of responsibility quietly, even when hope grew dim. His story reminds us that the life of a whaler was not only about the chase of whales, but about the unrelenting test of patience, the capacity to live with uncertainty, and the humility of knowing that the sea was always greater than oneself. After returning at last to Nantucket, Pollard's career never recovered in full. He commanded another voyage, but misfortune followed, and he never rose again to prominence among the captains of his day. In his later years, he lived quietly on the island, walking the streets with a reserved air. Remembered by his neighbors not as a man of wealth or power, but as one who had endured one of the most remarkable trials the sea could offer. Pollard's biography, when viewed calmly, speaks less of tragedy than of resilience. His life, like the steady movement of the ocean, reminds us that existence aboard a whaling ship was not built upon moments of glory, but upon long stretches of endurance, reflection, and acceptance of the sea's vast and indifferent presence. And so, through his story, we glimpse not only the fate of the Essex, but the quiet essence of whaling life itself, the reliance on routine, confrontation with nature's immensity, and the constant balance between fragility and perseverance. Beyond the daily routines and the stories of individual captains, whaling life carried with it a world of belief, ritual, and mystery. For sailors who spent years upon the open ocean, far removed from the comforts of home, The sea became not only a place of labor, but also of imagination and quiet superstition. Imagine a sailor leaning against the rail at night, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sky meets the water. In the dark stillness, the ocean seemed endless, a place of hidden forces and unseen presences. Men spoke softly of omens and signs, the way the wind shifted, the cries of seabirds, or the sudden silence of the waves. To them, these were not mere coincidences, but a hint of what lay ahead. Whalers, like many mariners, carried with them long traditions of superstition. A black cat seen aboard might be considered good luck, while whistling on deck was often frowned upon, set to invite storms. Some believed that killing an albatross, that graceful bird of the open seas, brought inevitable misfortune. Others whispered that whales themselves were not mere creatures, but near mythical beings, ancient and wise, their sudden appearances a reminder of the vast unknown beneath the waves. Archaeology, too, has offered us quiet glimpses into this seafaring world. Excavations in ports like Nantucket and New Bedford have uncovered fragments of scrimshaw-delicate carvings on whale teeth or bone, made during long stretches of idleness. These pieces, often decorated with intricate ships, flowers, or portraits of loved ones, reveal the inner lives of the sailors. To run one's fingers across the etched surface is to touch the memory of hours spent in reflection, as men carved, not for profit, but for the comfort of expression. Mystery also surrounds the unmarked graves of those who never returned from their voyages. Some men, lost at sea, were memorialized only in logbooks or in the quiet mourning of families ashore. Others left traces in personal items, pipes, buttons, or fragments of clothing recovered from wrecks. Each object tells a story, silent but enduring, a reminder of the countless unnamed lives folded into the history of whaling. There were also spiritual practices, subtle and often unspoken. Some sailors carried small talismans from home, a lock of hair, a charm, or a simple piece of wood from their village. These items, tucked into sea chests or worn close to the body, served as anchors of memory, connections to a world far removed from the boundless ocean. The sea itself became a kind of floating chapel, its rituals shaped not by priests or formal ceremony, but by the shared experiences of the crew. When a sailor was lost, whether to sickness or to the waves, the burial was simple, a prayer murmured, a body lowered over the side, the water closing gently as if erasing a name from the world. These moments were carried forward, not with grandeur, but with solemn acceptance, a recognition of the ocean's power and permanence. Even today, relics of whaling culture carry this aura of quiet mystery. The weathered journals of captains, written in careful script, speak of long stretches of calm seas, sudden storms, and the faint hope of profit in barrels of oil. Reading these words, one senses both the vast monotony and the quiet awe of men who spent years away from land. Their entries are steady, measured, and detached, yet within them rests the trace of solitude, the weight of endless horizons. In this way, whaling life was not only about labor or survival. It was also about the ways in which men made sense of their place in a world that seemed infinite. Through carvings, rituals, beliefs, and small acts of remembrance, they created a culture that was as much about endurance of the spirit as it was about endurance of the body. And so, as we move from mystery into our final segment, we will lift our gaze from the decks of the ship to the lives of those on shore. For while sailors endured the hardships of the ocean, there were others, merchants, investors, and elites whose lives were shaped by whaling in very different ways. While the common sailor lived within the cramped quarters of a whaling ship, enduring salt pork, hardtack, and the long monotony of sea life, the story looked very different for those who stood on shore. Whaling was not only a way of survival, was also an industry, a vast enterprise that linked distant oceans to the drawing rooms of wealthy merchants and the lamps of ordinary households. Picture, if you will, the quiet streets of Nantucket or New Bedford in the mid-19th century. The homes of whaling captains and ship owners rose above the harbor, their wide porches and tall windows reflecting prosperity earned not through their own hands at sea, but through the labor of others. These were houses filled with imported furnishings, polished wood, and lamps burning with whale oil, glowing brighter and longer than candles of tallow or beeswax. For the merchant class, whaling voyages represented both risk and opportunity. Investors pooled resources to outfit ships, purchasing barrels, ropes, sails, and provisions. Then waited 4 months, sometimes years, for vessels to return with their precious cargo. A full hold of whale oil meant great profit and influx of wealth that might finance new buildings, schools, or further voyages. A failed expedition, however, meant heavy losses, and so the fortunes of entire families rose and fell with the success of men far away at sea. The contrast between life on board and life on land was profound. While sailors wore the same clothing for weeks on end, grew lean on limited diets, and endured storms in open waters, their families at home dined on fresh bread, garden produce, and cuts of meat rarely seen aboard ship. Children played in the safety of fenced yards, while fathers and brothers braved distant oceans. Women managed households alone, balancing worry with resilience. Their lives tied to the rhythms of letters that arrived only sporadically, if at all. Among the elite, whaling also shaped social identity. To own shares in a whaling voyage was to belong to a network of power and influence, a sign of participation in one of the great engines of the American economy. Guests at parlors sipped tea imported from China, sweetened with sugar from the Caribbean, all made possible by ships that traversed the globe. The sea, though distant, was always present in the wealth displayed on land. Yet even in these fine homes, traces of the ocean crept in. Crimshaw pieces, carved by sailors and brought back as gifts, rested on mantels or in display cabinets. A whale's jawbone might form the arch of a garden gate. These artifacts served as reminders of the connection between the rough lives at sea and the comforts they provided ashore. The sailors endured years of hardship, while others benefited from the glow of well-lit rooms, the soft warmth of oil-fueled lamps, and the prosperity that flowed quietly into communities. It is worth noting that the industry itself reached far beyond New England. Whale oil illuminated lamps in London and Paris, lubricated the machines of the Industrial Revolution, and provided the wax for fine candles. From the Pacific Islands to the Arctic seas, the labor of whalemen shaped economies and connected distant cultures. And yet, for the sailors themselves, the rewards were often meager, small share of profit. Sometimes nothing at all if voyages went poorly. This stark divide between sea and shore, between those who endured and those who prospered, was one of the defining features of the whaling world. To walk the streets of Nantucket was to see evidence of grandeur, imposing houses, finely dressed families, churches built from shared wealth. To walk the deck of a whaling ship was to see rough hands, weathered faces, and men living with the sea's constant demands. And yet, both lives were interwoven. Without the patience and endurance of the common sailor, the merchant's fortune could not exist. Without the promise of profit and the steady financing from shore, the ship could not sail. Together, they formed a system balanced between hardship and comfort, monotony and prosperity. The creak of hammocks at night and the glow of lamps in distant drawing rooms. As our voyage nears its end, we leave behind the contrast of sailor and merchant, ship and shore. We return, one last time, to the broader rhythm of history, to reflect on what it meant and still means to live one's life in tune with the endless sea. And so, our quiet voyage aboard the whaling ships of the 19th century comes to a close. We have walked gently through the forecastle, where hammocks swayed in the dim lantern light. We have followed the story of Captain Pollard, whose quiet endurance mirrored the patience of the sea itself. We have paused to reflect on the mysteries and small rituals that gave sailors comfort in the endless stretches of ocean. And we have contrasted the hardships of life aboard with the prosperity enjoyed by those on shore, whose lamps burned bright with oil carried across the world. Through it all, a pattern emerges, one of rhythm, repetition, and endurance. The life of a whaleman was not marked by constant adventure, but by a steady acceptance of the sea's demands. The ocean was vast, unhurried, and impartial, and in its company, men learned the art of persistence. As you lie here now, listening, imagine yourself once more upon that gentle deck. The stars above shine brighter than you have ever seen them, scattered across the heavens in countless numbers. The ship creaks softly as it drifts on calm waters. A breeze carries the faint scent of salt, mingling with the resin of tarred ropes. The sailors have long since gone to their hammocks, the murmurs of their voices fading into stillness. Only the sea remains, its rhythm like the breath of the world, rising and falling, never ceasing. You may let your thoughts follow that rhythm, slow and calm, until they dissolve into quiet rest. The age of whaling has passed. The great ships no longer set out from Nantucket or New Bedford in search of the leviathans of the deep. But the memory of those lives, their routines, and their resilience lingers like a faint echo across the ocean. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you may take comfort in knowing that the hardships of that era are behind us, and that you rest in a safer, gentler world. The creak of the timbers and the hush of the sea remain only in memory, a lullaby from the past, carrying you softly into dreams. Good night.